let me start with what has happened yesterday. And we had some sort of attacks in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran controlling the Strait of Hormuz. It seems some tankers or ships wanted to pass through the Strait of Hormuz without using the designated routes by IRGC and Iranian authority. And then it was hit, one of them at least close to UAE. And then you see the American attack on Sirik in the southern part of Iran. And Associated Press, just before coming to this live, reported that Iran responded to American attack and by using drones and some targets in Bahrain. What has happened last night? Many people were arguing because we had the announcement of IRGC saying that we have responded to Americans, but nothing of the video footage, nothing came out. And on the part of the United States, the same way. They said that we attacked the Syrian region, but we haven't seen anything. Then later on, they published a footage of a target. It doesn't show that it's Syrian. I don't know what has happened. But there were reports in Iranian media that 2 telecommunication radars were hit by American, missiles. What has happened last night, Professor Marandi?
Well, we have to go back to the MOU. And in accordance with the MOU, the Americans have obligations. And they haven't carried out all of them. They've carried out some of them. They've ended the siege, which has benefited Iran a great deal. Iran has exported a lot of oil, as we all know, and other products, and it's importing goods. It's exported disproportionately a lot of oil compared to other countries in the Persian Gulf. So it's making up for a lot of lost exports as quickly as possible. Because at the end of the day, we are facing significant economic difficulties. They bombed our country for 39 days, bombing critical infrastructure. They bombed our gas fields. They bombed our petrochemical plants. They bombed our steel industry. They bombed pharmaceutical factories. They bombed apartment blocks. I met a person whose neighbor was like women had gathered in a building to make like food voluntarily for the soldiers that were manning. They're busy in Tehran at air defenses and so on, and they bombed their building and killed all the women. This person lived there. That person's home was in the same street. So they created a lot of death and destruction. And then, of course, we had the siege, and the siege prevented us from exporting oil. It prevented us from importing goods. So we have very high inflation right now. I think it's something like 70% or so. Which in Iran, inflation has always been high because of the sanctions and maximum pressure, but it's higher now than it usually is, and it will go higher unless the government does something about it. So the export of oil now in large quantities is obviously going to be good news for the government. So the Americans have also removed the sanctions on oil exports and oil-related exports, but they haven't released Iranian assets yet. And contrary to what some people are saying, that this is with regards to what Trump said, that it's going to be to purchase American goods. That's not the case. I've spoken to a couple of people directly involved. They said it's nonsense. But and also they have not done anything much on the Lebanese front, and that was the number one article in the MOU. So the Iranians, during this period, they allowed ships to go through the Strait of Hormuz, but in the Iranians created an arrangement where it would reflect the degree to which the Americans are implementing their side of the bargain. So what did the Americans try to do? They put pressure on Oman to declare and ignore Iran's mechanisms, Iran's regulations for leaving the strait. So ships began to move in that direction after the Omani declaration, and Iran hit one of those ships and said, "No, you do as we tell you. We're in a ceasefire. You take the route that we told you to take." Then the Americans took revenge and they bombed Iran. It wasn't a major attack. They hit 2 radar towers, but they're domestically made. They're not like expensive or problem. It's not a problem for Iran. And then the Iranians struck back and hit U.S. assets in Bahrain. And by the way, another ship today was struck, another tanker that was disobeying the Iranians. So the Iranians are going to enforce the way in which the regulations which they have declared for ships to travel through the Strait of Hormuz. And as I said, it's going to be reflective of U.S. implementation. If the U.S. implements the deal, then you're going to get more ships traveling easily through the strait. If the U.S. refrains from implementing its side of the bargain, the Iranians are going to be slower in allowing ships to pass through, and ships that cheat, they're going to pay a price for that.
I think what the United States is trying to do in the region with the recent visit of Marco Rubio to Bahrain, Kuwait, and UAE, they're trying to put pressure somehow on Omani government. Is that the calculation on the part of Iran, and how was that perceived by Iranians when it comes to the way, because he came to the region, he talked with Bahraini government, Kuwaiti government, and the UAE, but he didn't go to Saudi Arabia or Qatar. What was that?
Well, exactly, and it's not just that. The so-called deal between the proxy government in Beirut, which was installed by the Americans and does not have a popular mandate. The prime minister and the president are 2 literally agents of the United States. Their fake deal with the Israeli regime, which effectively allows the regime to continue occupying the country, and it's intended to destroy the resistance, that is also a violation of the deal. So the Americans are, by trying to undermine Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz, is a violation. Direct threats made by Trump against Iran are direct violations of the ceasefire deal, because he's during the duration of the deal that no threats should be made. This betrayal of Lebanon by the regime is a violation of the ceasefire deal. So the American, and by gathering these countries and putting out this hostile statement against Iran, of course, these are all in order to undermine Iran's position in the ceasefire arrangement. And it's the same countries that helped the Americans attack Iran. They signed this text, this anti-Iranian text, and yes, they're putting pressure on Oman too. So the Americans don't want to implement the deal; they want to undermine the deal, but they want Iran to abide by the deal. And the Iranians are not going to have any of that. Some people are saying, what is Iran going to do in response? Iran's response is the Strait of Hormuz. It regulates trade through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Iran doesn't want to shut down the whole strait completely. Iran has many calculations. Friendly countries use the Strait of Hormuz, so Iran has to take that into consideration. Some countries want to do deals with Iran. Iran has to take that into consideration. So to a degree, Iran wants to keep the Strait of Hormuz open for its own ships too, of course. But on the other hand, it's going to limit it based on the behavior of the United States. So while the United States is undermining, am I back?
You're back. Yeah, you're back.
Okay, so as the Americans have been undermining the MOU at multiple levels, the Iranians are reacting through the Strait of Hormuz, because the Strait of Hormuz is equal to all of those levers or that leverage that the United States has. The Iranians have much more leverage to the Strait of Hormuz itself. So the Iranians are going to continue using that to make sure that the Americans do not get their way.
Yeah. Here is what was reported from the Iranian source, that the number of applicants for passing through the Strait of Hormuz today, has increased. And while you see, because all of these tankers should use the designated routes by Iran, or is there some sort of communication between Iran and Oman? They can use, it's a combination, it's some sort of coordination between the two countries. The other point is Bloomberg reported, as I mentioned before, that Omani government has informed Europeans that they may have to pay fees if they want to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. What was the outcome of the latest communications between Iran and the Omani government and the routes that they have defined for the Strait of Hormuz?
Well, the Iranians and the Omanis do have an arrangement, but that's for the future, because after the 2 months, the Iranians are going to take fees for the ships. Right now, in accordance with the ceasefire agreement, for the 2 months period, they're not going to do so. So the Iranians and the Omanis are preparing for the future. Of course, but the route that Oman declared a couple of days ago was under duress. It was under pressure by the United States. The Americans want for Iran to lose control of the Strait of Hormuz. They want ships to go through and ignore Iran. So by forcing Oman to declare that route, they wanted to put Iran in a difficult position. If Iran ordered the ships to go back and struck a ship, it would be a route that Oman has declared. But the Iranians said, no, we're not going to, it doesn't matter. Even if Oman declares this route, it's under duress from the United States. It violates the agreement that we have with the Americans, and we'll block those ships. So after Iran hit one of those ships that tried to escape, all the other ships pulled back, and then other ships started communicating with Iran saying, we want to, now that they're more worried about traveling through the strait without Iran's permission, they're trying to register their ships for permission to travel through the strait with Iranian coordination. So Iran, they're right now, there are some small ships that cling to the Omani coast. They go and they go to Fujairah, and then they take some goods or oil, and then they
Fujairah in UAE.
Yes, because Oman controls the Strait of Hormuz, but to the two sides, I mean, people have to look at the map to get what I'm saying, but the Emirates is on the two sides of Oman. So these ships go they go from the Emirates right alongside Oman's coast, and then back to the Emirates to Fujairah, and then these small ships, okay, am I back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, that's just the connection. So the ships these small ships, they cling to the Omani coast. They're not big ships because big ships can't go there. So some goods are sort of smuggled through without Iran's consent, and then they take that oil and they transport it to larger tankers. A number of ships, I suppose, have to go back and forth to fill a tanker. It's more expensive, time-consuming. Not all that much oil goes through, but I mean, it's not enough. But in any case, there are violations. But in general, the Iranians are enforcing the passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz now.